God, how I regretted that I never got around to making my wife Claire the bookcase she'd been pressing me for ever since we moved into the old Federation cottage. A cottage she fell in love with and just had to have when we finally had enough money to move from an apartment to a house. When you read the words Old Federation, you decipher that to mean that I had to spend almost every weekend and even more than a few evenings doing repairs and maintenance. And that is once again an understatement. Thank goodness I'm a carpenter by trade, and as frustrating as it was for Claire, I felt that making a working kitchen and replacing rotten floorboards was more important than building a bookcase, no matter how much she loved to read or how many books she wanted to unpack from the boxes stored in the old barn. So yes, forgive me for being romantic and wanting to do something nice for my wife on their upcoming 10th wedding anniversary. As if buying an old cottage and spending almost every spare minute to make it beautiful for her wasn't enough proof of my love and devotion. Sufficient proof of my desire to please her and make her happy. While she put in an herb garden in the backyard and planted beautiful roses on the walkway to our front door, I had to pretty much gut everything inside and rebuild. But apparently that doesn't mean dedication as much as a gift to her in the form of a long weekend at the spa. Long story short, while she was getting ready to celebrate our milestone anniversary, getting facials, massages, and generally pampering herself, I was sweating over the construction of a custom bookcase that will take up an entire wall of our living room. I was excited about the planned surprise until I tripped while bringing in the fifth box from the shed and threw the entire box 6 feet in the air. The box was filled with romance novels, Claire's weakness. The books flew everywhere. One even hit the light fixture, and it swung wildly. So did the beautiful pastel paper. As I soon discovered, love letters should be stored in the pages of books about love that conquers all. Logical, I suppose. How I wish I hadn't been tempted to read the first paragraphs of the first book I came across. But I couldn't resist. And how could I? Page after page fell to the floor like petals tossed into the air like confetti. It reminded me of our wedding day. Sweet and innocent and romantic. So promising of a happy future. And tempting. How deceptive. I thought they were from Claire's youth, from one of her high school boyfriends. Something she'd kept for sentimental reasons, and remembering one or two heartwarming love notes I'd written myself as a lovesick 15-year-old, I read one. A big mistake. A huge one. A problem had arisen. A huge problem. The love letters were not from a childhood sweetheart. But that wasn't the only problem. Two others immediately came to mind. The letter in my hand was written by my cousin Zach. The other problem, the one I held in my hand, was dated just a few weeks before we moved into the cottage a year ago. This information raised a lot of questions. How long had they been having an affair? Were they still dating? Was she with him now? Was Claire hiding any more letters? No. 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 Of course not. Not while I was laboring to give her the house of her dreams. My labor of love for her. My heart recoiled in absolute terror at the questions, at the possibilities. My brain, my always logical brain, told me that it was all too likely, and that at some point I would need to answer these questions, no matter how repugnant they were. When the first letter slipped from my gutless fingers, I wished I could turn back time so I'd never read it. It pierced me. I shook as if I'd been hit hard in the chest. I tried to breathe, but it felt like my ribs were broken. The pain robbed me of my strength, and I staggered to the floor. I sat leaning against the wall with my head between my knees, willing the contents of my stomach to stay outside my body. I had lost this battle. I managed, without wasting a second, to roll to my knees. The assault of the sour odor on my senses caused more gagging until there was nothing left inside me. I crawled away from the mess, not trusting my legs to support my weight, and sat down, leaning my back against the hated bookcase. I eyed the other letters scattered across the floor like a patchwork quilt of pastel pinks, blues, and creams. They looked pretty nice against the dark wood floor. Another lie. Another deception. I knew their contents would not be cute at all. I pondered whether to read them. The cowardly part of me, the part that agonized, didn't want to, didn't think I could take more pain. It wanted to crawl away and hide. It wanted to dig a hole for me that I could stick my head into. It said that reading them was like sticking red-hot pokers in my eyes and heart. The bolder, more rational side told me to rip the blindfold off my eyes in one fell swoop. It was telling me to end this painful part of the journey that I was now being pushed into. It was telling me that there was no point in prolonging the agony. It was whispering to me that I needed to gather all the information I could for the coming battle, because the battle, the confrontation, was inevitable. I listened to my brave side. Kneeling down, I gathered all the letters and sorted them by date. Zach, that ever-helpful bastard, had been kind enough to put the dates in. I'd have to remember to thank him later, maybe with a fist. Apparently, he only wrote 2 or 3 letters a year to coincide with Valentine's Day or her birthday. I gulped when I saw one dated a few days before my 30th birthday. Another problem was making itself felt. Most of them had been written after Claire and I had gotten married. I settled into my favorite chair. The bitter odor emanating from my vomit seemed appropriate. It matched my feelings. I closed my eyes and, despite the acrid odor, took a few deep, strengthening breaths. Starting with the oldest one, written when Claire and I were still dating, I began to read. Words and phrases jumped off the pages, branding my heart, filling my mind with unwanted images. Images that made me bite my lip to hold back sounds of pain. I thought I was the birthday boy when you managed to sneak away from old Danny boy at the party. I think what we did in the alley was pretty hot. Thank you, my beautiful woman. I realized from the date that he was talking about Claire's 21st birthday. We'd been dating for a year. She looked so beautiful that night. I distinctly remembered the white dress she wore that evening, and the way it fluttered around her as she danced. That was the night I decided to ask her to marry me. I had been such a gullible fool. The first fingers of anger dug into my gut, fighting the pain for possession of my body. Standing next to Danny, watching you walk down the aisle knowing everything, is the most perverse, the most twisted thing I've ever known. You are such a naughty, naughty girl, Claire Bear. I love it. After those lines, I had to stop for a moment while my stomach tried to find something else to vomit. The pain overwhelmed me. Even my fingers and toes hurt. No. Please, God, no. On our wedding day? She cheated on me with him on our wedding day? What about him? My cousin? A relative? God, we grew up together. I considered him one of my best friends. He was one of my fiancés. At this point, I needed a break. Staggering, I made my way to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my flushed face. I barely recognized the man who was looking at me. I couldn't look at this man. Seeing his pain was too much for me to bear. I concentrated on brushing my teeth, hoping to rid my mouth of the bitter taste on my tongue. The toothpaste didn't help. Mouthwash didn't help either. If those failed, perhaps the brandy I kept on hand for my father would help. I usually preferred beer, but when my father came to visit, I shared a bottle with him. He always claimed that brandy was medicine. I hoped he was right. I could use some medicine for my broken and bleeding heart. I leaned back in my chair and continued reading, and every time I read something particularly painful, I took a sip of brandy. Many sips. I savored the burning sensation. Father was right. It was medicine. It cauterized my wounds from the inside out. The tone of Zach's letters formed a direct contrast to the soft pastel paper they were written on. They should have been written on sheets of red. Blood red from the perversion, from the wounds they inflicted, from the emotional blood they spilled. A poet, he was not. I wondered why she kept them. He had never written about her beauty, compared her to the moon and stars, said she was his alpha and omega, or compared the two of them to famous lovers like Romeo and Juliet. He never professed his love for her. He had written many times that he liked something she said, did, or wore, but he had never told her he loved her. Oddly enough, it made me feel sorry for her. She'd abandoned our marriage, abandoned the love of a good man, and I was a good man, for dirty fun. Besides, he could never keep a girl. More often than not, they left him, not the other way around. If he was such a stud, such a fantastic lover, such a great catcher, why was he always being replaced by another model? And the last letter was written in the same vein as the others, and either the brandy had stupefied me, or the sheer amount of disgusting shit I'd already read had robbed me of the ability to be shocked. There was nothing in the tone or wording to suggest that their affair was over, or even budding. Quite the opposite. Zach wrote off that he was looking forward to christening every room in the cottage with his Claire Bear. Judging by his signature, there were 2 or 3 more letters hidden somewhere in the house. Relying on my not-so-loving wife's previous filing system, I headed into our bedroom to the cheap temporary bookshelf she had placed against the wall at her side of the bed. Within 5 minutes, I found 3 more letters. I couldn't even express the horror of her keeping them in our bedroom. That she had done so little to conceal them. Had she really been reading them while I was showering in our bathroom? She had shown herself to be such a brazen bitch and slut that nothing surprised me anymore. I realized I didn't really know her at all. The girl I thought I married would never do what she did. This realization broke through the pain that had already engulfed me and pierced my heart with a new wound. My wife was a stranger to me. The last letter, dated only a week earlier, brought me out of my stupor. It took several attempts to read it in its entirety as my vision kept blurring. I couldn't believe that I had actually read its contents correctly. It was too violent. And while the blood rumbled in my ears, I reread it once more, wanting to make sure my mind hadn't made up those words from some dark place unmentionable. God, are you serious? You really want you to have a baby with me? Man, just the thought of you having a baby with me and making old Danny Boy raise it makes me feel like, God, you're the ugliest woman I've ever known, Claire Bear. Good God. She wanted Zach to be the father of our children. I've been asking her when we could start a family since our 5th wedding anniversary. I was passionate about becoming a father. Every year I asked, and every year she waved me off, saying that we, which really meant she, wasn't ready. She made all the expected excuses. We need more time to solidify our careers. We need to be more financially stable. We need to live in a house instead of an apartment. I cleared every obstacle she put up, and finally, after our 9th anniversary, she agreed that we should try after our 10th, a week later. I planned to remind her of this at our celebratory dinner. This can't be true. Oh my God, it couldn't be true. But it was. It was in black and white. His letter confirming her words, her plans, her desires. I was too stunned to feel the pain of this revelation. Or rather, I was already in so much pain that this final blow was only perceived as an intensification of my agony. As if in an unwanted commercial break, I ran through the scenario in my head. I envisioned her sharing the news with him that their fun had borne fruit, that she's pregnant and he's going to be a daddy. He would kiss her, of that I was sure, and hug her, but would his face portray joy, or would he just look triumphant because he'd won another victory over me? If he looked triumphant, would he hide it from her? Or would she share his triumphant gloating? I always pictured myself in that moment when she shared such big news with me, like I was like the guys in a snotty romantic movie, emotional, proud, happy. But I wasn't part of that movie. Not really. I was a foil, a scapegoat. Zach stole my lines, my role, my future, the news, the hugs, the kisses, twirling her in my arms, and we were both filled with happiness. This was supposed to be my role, my part, all of it. I've been waiting for years for her to be ready. What was Zach waiting for? Who did he love and cherish and support? Who he sacrificed and compromised for? No one. Not one damn soul. Maybe she would never be ready for me because she didn't want me to be the father of her children. That possibility broke through the fog of pain to pierce a new wound. Why had I chosen to read the first letter? Why had I given in to my curiosity? If I had resisted, I might have remained in ignorance. God, I wanted to stay in the dark. I squeezed my eyes tightly shut to shut out the new reality. I needed the old reality. The one where I believed my wife loved me and only me. The one where I was happy. Now I was agonizingly aware of it, drowning in overwhelming pain. Now I had decisions to make, difficult decisions. Now I was faced with the realization that my entire marriage had been one big lie, one huge farce, a sham. I now knew that the last 12 years of my life had been wasted. Throughout our relationship, I had been made a fool of day in and day out. My love had been squandered on someone who didn't appreciate or respect it, and certainly didn't deserve it. I knew now that I had been used and deceived for God knows what reason. None of the vows, promises, or words of love were true. None of it. All lies and deceit. Image after image, like a film of favorite moments, flashed through my mind. Claire laughs, looking at me. Claire smiles. Her tears the day I got down on my knee and asked her to marry me. Claire is asleep, the face of an angel. Claire's hand in my hand, her face when I made love to her. Lies. Lies. Who was that woman? What had I done to her to make her hate me so much? She should hate me. No one could do what she did without absolutely hating her victim. I sat sipping my brandy and tried to reconcile the woman portrayed in Zach's letters with the woman I knew and loved. My torn heart didn't want to look into it further, but my brain was determined to solve the mystery. There was no way I could turn it off. It was determined to find an explanation. It couldn't live with unanswered questions. Why, how, and where? Mostly why. I'd never been blindly in love with Claire. I knew she had flaws, that she wasn't a saint, but I loved her quirks and flaws. They were a part of her and made her unique, so I loved them as much as I hoped. No, believed she loved me, even though I wasn't so perfect. Or maybe because of it. If you asked me when I woke up, I'd say we complement each other. She taught me spontaneity. I taught her organizational skills. She learned how to set goals. I learned that sometimes it's okay to veer off track. I thought she was the yin to my yang. I thought she was basically a good person. I never knew her to say mean things about friends, family, or coworkers. In fact, I always thought she was kind to those around her. She could flirt a little when she had a couple glasses of wine, but nothing excessive. I never doubted her loyalty. Of course, I often thought she was a bit flighty and too involved in small things that didn't really matter, like keeping up with celebrity life, the latest fashion trends and hairstyles. I didn't think she needed all that nonsense. She was just as beautiful without makeup and jeans and a t-shirt, with her hair gathered in a ponytail as she was in a designer dress, with her hair styled in an elaborate updo and coated with enough hairspray to blow a hole in the ozone layer. But she was a stickler for any celebrity commercial. She had enough cosmetics to open her own pharmacy. And shoes. My goodness, that woman loved shoes. We would have been much more successful financially if she had curbed her passion for them and handbags. Not that I had a problem with spending money, I wasn't tight on funds, but I preferred to spend it on things that made sense. Things like making memories together, special dinners, weekends away, traveling to other countries. Things like learning to ski or ride horses together. Hell, I'd even go to cooking or pottery classes with her if it made her happy. If it was something we could do or study together, I was okay with it. Claire enjoyed our travels, but looking back, I realized that while I gravitated toward visiting some architectural marvel, gallery, or museum, she preferred to spend her time on some trendy shopping street. While I wanted to snorkel with sea turtles, she wanted to sunbathe and watch celebrities by the pool. The list could go on and on. I reluctantly admitted to myself that we spent most of the day each doing our own thing, the exception being when I compromised and only met her at the hotel for dinner. It seemed she wasn't as far removed from the petty, selfish slut in Zach's letters as I'd initially assumed. All I had to do to recognize her was take off the rose-colored glasses. I closed my eyes for a moment, despising myself for being blind to her true nature. It became clear to me that I was only seeing what I wanted to see. I was concentrating on those things she said or did that reinforced my image, and ignoring or discarding those that contradicted it. I was very bitter to realize that my naivety and idealism had contributed to her betrayal. How she and Zach must have laughed at my gullibility. How they must have giggled at my unquestioning trust in my wife. Despair hit me between the eyes like a bullseye. Our whole relationship, 12 years, 12 goddamn years, right under my nose, over and over and over again. How could I have been so stupid? So blind? How could I be such an idiot? God, maybe I deserved it. Maybe my stupidity was the reason I deserved the horns she put on me. For a while, I wallowed in self-pity. My stomach churned, my throat lumped, and my eyes burned with unshed tears. I didn't want to cry, didn't want to let her know that. She'd never know, but I would, and she wasn't worthy of my grief. And then something happened, some chemical reaction in my brain, and right then and there, I made the decision to stop berating myself. I wasn't the one who lied and cheated and used. I wasn't the one who cheated and betrayed. I wasn't the bad guy. Whatever my flaws were, they didn't excuse the way I was treated. Love made a fool of me and made me deaf, numb, and blind to what was happening in my own backyard. That's what love does. Love makes you trust, wants to please, support, and nurture. It made you believe the best in your partner. It meant you were giving them the benefit of the doubt. After all, what sane person would choose to love someone violent and immoral like Claire or Zach? People like them counted on the kindness of people like me, counted on our trust and faith, on our innate belief that most people are basically decent. If I had to choose between an unconscious asshole and a gullible goon, I'd choose the goon. At least he can look in the mirror and know that the person looking back at him is honorable, maybe stupid, but honorable. With each passing minute, the multitude of conflicting emotions raging in my body were gradually reduced to two: grief and rage. The grief I deliberately put aside in a drawer to deal with later. In the end, I was mourning a woman, a relationship that never existed. They were a fairy tale that existed only in my imagination. However, the anger was righteous and deserved. Anger earned the right to show its ugly head. And it was ugly. Ugly and caustic, just what I needed. While pain threatened to cripple me, rage strengthened the steel in my spine and the resolve in my gut. Be smart, Danny. Be smarter. Neither Claire nor Zach are worth going to jail for. Besides, death would be too humane. What will they know about pain or regret if they end up in the grave? Research. I needed to do research to know my rights in a divorce. Encouraged, I rushed to the spare bedroom where my home office was now located. An hour later, I knew a lot more about Australian divorce than I had the day before. We had to be officially divorced for a year before I could file for divorce, and once the application was filed with the court, I had to wait for a hearing date of about 4 to 6 weeks, during which time I had to make sure she received the summons. Then, if the judge was satisfied that our marriage had broken down irretrievably, he would issue a decree nisi. 1 month and 1 day after that, unless I changed my mind, which we know doesn't happen, the court would automatically issue an absolute decree. Claire could challenge the division of our property for 12 months after the absolute decree was issued. I walked around the cottage and looked at all my hard work. In its half-finished state, the house would not yield much income, and in truth, we were likely to lose money. But once the repairs were completed, a handsome profit could be made, mainly because we would not have to pay for my labor. The house was Claire's choice, but I'll be damned if I'm going to move and give it to her in the divorce. In fact, it might just be another way to inflict some pain on that conniving bitch. I'd rather burn down the apartment than see her rewarded for her perfidy. When we got married, I already had my own apartment. Well, the bank did, but the mortgage was in my name, and the payments came out of my earnings. It was the equity I had built up at the time of the sale that provided the bulk of our contribution to the purchase of the cottage, and the balance came from our savings account, into which, as I could prove, I was contributing 3 times as much as Claire. Besides, my paycheck covered the mortgage. What's more, my paycheck covered most of our lives, utilities, both phones, payments for her Mazda 3, various insurances, and even vacations. The only things Claire paid for were her clothes, hair, and makeup, and some groceries. If I understood what I read correctly, it was a godsend that we didn't start a family. Without children to complicate things, the division of our assets didn't have to be 50-50. If I could show where the deposit and loan payments and everything else I had paid during our marriage came from, she would only be entitled to 30 to 40% of our assets. So no renovations until the divorce and property settlement is finalized. And if I tweaked my work a little bit, I wasn't sure if this was true, but most cliches have a basis in fact. So if possession is 9/10 of the law, I decided I would own. That meant changing the locks before she got home Monday night. Today was Saturday, which meant I had plenty of time. I had plenty of time to back up and do a little procrastination. We didn't need to separate our bank accounts since we never got around to having a joint checking or savings account. Knowing what I know now, I wondered if that was intentional on her part. Why would she want to do that if I'm paying for everything? Much better that she keep the money separate so I don't see how much money she spends on clothes and such. Or worse, spending it on hotels so she could sleep with Zach. The only thing I did was pay off and drastically lower the limit on our shared credit card. Given that most of the transactions on it came from her, it seemed unfair to clear it at the expense of my income, but I wanted to limit her access to money without alerting her to my vague plans. And I sure as hell didn't want to be responsible for all the debt she'd run up from here on out. Right now, the limit was $250, so she'd be able to get gas or pay for food for the next couple days without realizing what I'd done. The only thing I was concerned about was my retirement fund. Given that my income was 3 times what Claire's was, and I was a few years older, I had considerably more set aside for retirement. A sympathetic judge could award her up to 50% of my pension at the time of separation, regardless of how our other assets were divided. Of course, they could award me half of hers as well, but I'd still end up on the losing end and she'd be laughing all the way to the bank. I mentally tagged myself to figure out what I could do to prevent her from gaining access. Once I was done with what I could think of to do online regarding our finances, I hovered, feeling lost. What now? Searching for an answer, I looked around and saw traces of my vomit on the living room floor. Pulling myself together, I cleaned it up, and its vile stench brought my simmering rage to the boiling point once again, and my attention returned to my actions. Time to pack Claire's things. As I worked, I pondered what to do with her things. I could put them in storage or take them to her parents' house. I could even take them to Zach's apartment. At first, I dismissed the idea of putting the stuff in storage, since I'd have to pay the first month's rent up front, and I didn't want to spend another dime on that bitch. But as the evening wore on, the idea became more and more appealing. I could change the locks and go off on my own for a few days without letting Claire know of my movements. Let her wonder, worry, and frustrate for a few days without knowing where I was or what was going on. Perhaps the investment of a few dollars would be worth it to witness it. The only thing of Claire's I've kept are the letters. I thought about scanning them, but decided it was better to keep the originals. They obviously meant something to her, even if only to stroke her ego or feel attractive and powerful, or she wouldn't have kept them. Leaving them behind would be another jab of pain and disappointment out of the many I intended to inflict on her and her asshole lover. I wondered how Zach would feel about our entire extended family reading his letters. The rhythmic action of packing organized my thoughts, and when I was done, I went back to my home office and set reminders in my Outlook calendar to officially register our breakup in a week and disconnect Claire's phone. Giving her a week meant I'd be married to her for an extra week, but it also gave me time to make some plans, and it was worth the stress and uncertainty. Plus, I would enjoy the messages I was sure she would leave on my phone. Since her car loan was in both of our names, I was able to change the repayment account to Claire's, and while I was at her car, I called the insurance company and canceled the insurance starting the following Friday. This allowed me to recoup almost half of what I had paid, and armed with that small amount, I made a firm decision on where to store Claire's belongings. My stomach finally made itself known, demanding that I feed it. I was hungry, and yet not. Physically, my body demanded sustenance, but mentally, the thought of food repulsed me. Trying to appease both sides, I heated up a can of soup and, eating it with buttered toast, refined some details of my short term plans. Next chapter. Turning my head, I glanced at the clock radio on my bedside table. 3:15. I sighed. 45 minutes had passed since I'd last checked the clock. It had been easy to keep my rage low during the day and evening, but now, deep into the night, my rage was waning, unable to sustain itself. I wanted it back. Rage was a good thing. Rage helped me stay on my feet and focused on doing justice when the thought of betraying my love threatened to shatter me to the core. Pain, however, did not suffer from the same problem as rage. Pain thrived in the darkness. Pain overwhelmed me. I cried, fighting every tear. I clamped my eyes shut, trying to stop their flow. Each one that rolled down my temples shamed me. She didn't deserve them. Like my love, they were wasted on her. Next chapter. I welcomed the streams of light streaming through the porch. Daylight meant activity, and activity meant getting rid of pain. Shoving a piece of toast down my throat, I looked around, figuring out what I could make out. I had a fine line to walk. The house had to remain livable for the next 2 years, but I wanted to keep the cost as low as possible. The day passed quickly, and by the time the sun disappeared over the horizon, Claire's belongings had been put into storage, the locks changed, and several rooms of the cottage didn't look so finished anymore. With a beer in my hand, I dialed my parents' number. Luckily, my father answered the phone. My mother was too intuitive. She, I knew, would figure me out in less than 2 minutes. Less than 1, to be exact. Hi, Dad. Hi, Danny. This is going to be a quick call, Dad. I just wanted to let you and Mom know that I'll be out of town for about a week, so I won't be coming to dinner on Wednesday as usual. I've been asked to put together an estimate for a full build-out for a new hotel and restaurant complex a few hours north of here. Sounds like a good job. It must be a big job if you have to go away for a week. Don't forget to bring pictures of the Irish-themed pub you made in the valley. Yeah, it's big, but I thought while I was there I'd check out the area to see if I could find some more job offers and find out the prices of housing or short-term rentals for me and the boys. That's my boy. Always thinking positive and forward-thinking. Like father, like son, right, Dad? My dad chuckled. Well, I don't like to brag. Now it was my turn to laugh. I gotta go, Dad. I have to get ready because I want to get an early start to the morning so I don't get caught in rush hour traffic. Tell Mom I love her and I'll see you when I get back. Okay, son. Have a safe trip and good luck with the quote. Oh, I just remembered, show them pictures of that man cave you did for that divorced guy. That was a freaking awesome bar and play area you designed and built for him. Someday I'll talk your mom into letting you build me one just like it. His mention of the man cave, it was a standing family joke, was a reason for me to laugh. It sounded forced to me, and I hoped my father wouldn't catch on. I called before I gave myself away, or he got up the nerve to ask for details. I hadn't lied, just twisted the truth a bit. There was a montage up north that I had to get done as soon as possible, just not this week. I then called my brother and best friend Sean and told him the same story I had told my father. I was comfortable with my ruse. At least neither he nor our parents would lie to Claire on my behalf. Soon I would have to tell them the truth and draw them into my infernal circle. I was dreading this. I knew they would feel my pain as their own. I wondered if Claire and Zach thought about things like that, about how many people their affair would hurt. Probably not. I carefully considered who to leave the next message to. It had to be someone unlikely to socialize with my father or brother, but someone Claire could talk to. In the end, I couldn't decide between Claire's two closest work friends, Susie and Terry. Both were married, part of our large circle of friends, and if I were organizing a surprise party, would certainly be on the guest list. I called both of them. Hi, Susie. This is Danny. Hi, Danny. How are you doing? How's Claire spending the weekend at the spa? Rotten cow. I'm so jealous. Susie's soft laugh was no match for her teasing words. Fine, I guess. At least she didn't call me complaining. I tried to inject some lightness and humor into my voice, but the attempt left a bitter taste in my mouth. I'll say this quickly, Susie, because I have a ton of calls to make, but I'm planning a surprise party for Claire for our 10th wedding anniversary. I thought I'd call as many people as I can today to get their opinions, because I'll be out west next week for work, and, as you know, Claire will be home tomorrow, and it will be harder to sneak this past her. Not surprisingly, Susie agreed to make herself and her hubby available. I gave her some vague details, unofficial, in 2 weeks, feel free to invite others, and that I would contact her to confirm the place and time. Of course, it was all nonsense. I wasn't going to throw a party in any way, shape, or form. My conversation with Terry was pretty much the same. Now the hardest call of all. Zach. I poured myself a glass of brandy and tipped it back down in one fell swoop. The burning in my throat caused it to fizzle. As its warmth lingered in my stomach, I hit speed dial on Zach's number. Obviously, this was something I was going to have to change. I couldn't imagine a future in which I'd be exchanging calls with my traitorous cousin. Hey, Rat Zach, how are they doing? For the first time, I realized how apt Zach's childhood nickname really was. He had earned it as a kid for getting into trouble all the time. How many times I'd seen his mother give him a light slap in annoyance and call him a Pied Piper. It was affectionate at the time. Now I said it with conviction. Zach, the arrogant bastard, didn't notice anything. Hey, Danny, how's it going? I told Susie and Terry pretty much the same story I'd told them, with flecks of what I'd told my dad and Sean, only in his version I said I'd be at work a few hours south. You're really spoiling Claire, Danny. Maybe it was just me, but there was a hint of smugness in his tone. I clamped my mouth shut, my nostrils flaring with rage. Zach was lucky he was on the other end of the phone line and not standing in front of me because I highly doubted I'd be able to hold back if we were face to face. Yeah, well, that's what you do when you love someone. You spoil them. That I didn't choke on the words was a small miracle. You should try that with all the girls you date. Maybe at least one will stick around. As soon as I let the barb at him out of my mouth, I regretted it. It was stupid. I held my breath, waiting for his response and hoping I hadn't given away my true feelings for the jerk. Zach laughed. You're probably right, but then you're assuming I want them around. Maybe I prefer variety. Spicing up your life and all that, huh? Yeah, something like that. Except for Claire. Except for my wife. I needed to end the conversation before I gave myself away. Well, I'll leave you to your skirt chasing. I don't know about that. A few dinners seem a lot less to me than what some married guys put out to please their wives. Maybe. I laughed forcedly, unable to resist one last barb. But then again, Claire was always easy to please. Bring her home a bouquet of flowers, that's all. And more than once, in fact, and exactly the way I taught her. I won't even talk about what she does when she gets a new purse for her ever-expanding collection. I'll just say that when I do, I have a good week. More than good and worth every penny. Silence hung on the other end of the phone, and I wondered if I'd gone too far. I'd never spoken rudely about Claire. Shit. I'd better get off my shit. Obviously, I drank too much while I was making those calls. It loosened my tongue too much. Don't worry, Danny. Your secret's safe with me. Hopefully safer than the way you respected our family ties and Claire's marriage vows, asshole. Yeah, thanks. Talk to you soon. Thoughts scurried across the surface of my mind, like the pebbles I'd so often rolled across the still surface of the lake of my childhood. I was thinking about stupid things. Things I hadn't thought about in years. Zach and I would run into the bushes behind his house to try the cigarettes Zach had stolen from his dad, and the two of us would cough and splutter. Sean, Zach, and I played football with the other neighborhood kids. Sleepovers where the three of us whispered until deep into the night. Zach and I on a double date at the movie theater. We were both virgins and nervous as hell. The three of us trying to outdo each other by playing Pokemon on our Game Boys. Fishing, swimming, surfing, camping. So many thoughts, so many memories. and they're all ruined. When did Zach forget our friendship? Our childhood together? Our kinship? When did he decide that betraying me was a price he was willing to pay to entertain my girlfriend, my wife? How could he look at himself in the mirror knowing what he'd done to me, to our family? How did he justify it to himself? I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stop thinking. They wouldn't help me, only hurt me and drive me crazy with the lack of answers. Disheartened but satisfied that I'd achieved my goal of hiding my whereabouts for the next week, depending on who or how many people Claire talked to, she might think I was north, south, or west of our house. I headed for the shower. Next chapter. Another night of being tossed around. Another night of being haunted by questions I was unlikely to ever get answers to. At least honest answers. None that I could accept without reservation or doubt. By their actions, both Claire and Zach have shown themselves to be deceitful, untrustworthy, and self-serving. Anything they would say in their defense would raise suspicion. It was annoying. I wanted to know the truth. I couldn't stop the questions swarming in my head. I wanted to know why. I wanted to know how they could have done such a horrible thing. I wanted there to be something. Something I could dwell on. Something I could point to and say, yes, this is why she betrayed me. This is why she didn't love me. The situation would be easier to bear if there was something concrete I could blame. Some simple explanation that would make everything make sense and shield me from the agony of not knowing the reasons. If there was never a spark for her, a connection, why marry me? If she wanted Zach, why didn't she marry him? If she wanted to mess around, why marry me at all? Why the betrayal? The cruelty? Why all the lies, the years and years of deceit? Why the indifference to my feelings? And him? I wanted to know how he could look me in the eye all these years and blatantly lie to me over and over and over again. I wanted to know how he could deny our shared history like that. How could he stand next to me in church knowing what he had done? How could he take pleasure in it? I wanted to know the same truth from Claire. How? How could she? Why? She had a good life. She was loved and cherished. So why? What did I do wrong? What in God's name did I do wrong? I knew deep down that nothing I did would ever justify their actions, but even knowing that, I was still torn apart by the realization that I would never know the whole truth. You're gonna have to find a way to deal with it, Danny, man. You're never gonna know. Torturing yourself with it will only give them even more power, and you've already given them too much. Despite my inner cheerfulness, I continued to ponder everything I didn't understand. I felt washed ashore, without an anchor in a fast-flowing river. Everything I had believed about Claire and me had turned out to be a lie. Nothing about our life was as I had envisioned it. With no truth to hold on to, I felt lost. I saw myself in the mirror and cursed Claire and Zach for the way my shoulders slumped and my head bowed. As I watched my reflection, I remembered my decision from the night before, not to blame myself for Claire and Zach's actions. I wasn't responsible for their actions, they were. I deliberately straightened and squared my shoulders, lifting my chin. My gaze was defiant. They couldn't beat me. I wasn't going to give them that. They won't break me. I wouldn't let them. They've already taken enough from me. I won't give them any more. Next chapter. I grinned. She was more angry than happy, but it was a start. It was 5 in the morning and Claire didn't like mornings. Even at 7, when I usually woke her up, I almost needed a crowbar to get her out of bed. Hello, Claire. Sorry for the early message, but I didn't sleep last night. It was the beer. I'll be at work till 8 o'clock Friday. I'll call you when I can. Love you. Using my nickname for Claire made me cringe, even more than saying love you. Never again would I think of her as something delightfully sweet and easy. Whether she was awake or not, I doubted she would answer. Most likely she'd read this, roll over and try to go back to sleep, probably cursing me. I smirked, rinsing my coffee cup and setting it on the drain rack. I reached down and grabbed my suitcase, heading for the front door. I was going to be gone for a few days to make the story I told my father and brother more true. After the previous evening's calls had established an alibi, I made a decision that prompted me to make another one. I called Ray, who worked for me as a foreman, and told him the same story I had told my father and Sean. We chatted a bit about our current jobs, and I called, knowing I could trust him to take care of things while I was gone. As I closed the front door, I was struck by the silence. No dogs barking, not even the birds had started their morning song. I inhaled the cool fall air with pleasure. It was sweet, rich with the scent of jasmine, cascading down the length of the lattice fence separating the cottage from our neighbors, the McDonald's on the left. I tossed my suitcase into the passenger seat of my pride and joy, a working Toyota Hilux SUV. I guess you could say it showed that I am indeed a man of simple tastes. Porsches and Lamborghinis are not to my taste, but a tuned-up work truck, pardon the pun, made my engine work. Mine was polished to a high shine, a custom blood red color, with a custom-designed tray full of built-in toolboxes, drawers, and shelves that helped organize my work life. I pulled out of the driveway and headed toward the highway. I enjoyed the drive down the road. With each mile that separated me from the cottage, my head became clearer and my thoughts more focused. Away from anything to do with Claire, it was easier to think. And I needed to think. And planning. Part 2. I leaned back on the chaise lounge, shaded by a huge umbrella with a beer in my hand. The only thing separating the motel from the beach was a small patch of lawn shaded by palm trees and an in-ground pool. Both were attractive, and the weather was warm, but I didn't notice the appeal of either. I was disappointed. Plan after plan, idea after idea was rejected. Some were brilliant, others not so much. All of them were drenched in revenge, humiliation. I could take out a big 2-page ad in the local paper and publicize Zach's letters, names, dates, and all. I could stall for time, get a private investigator on them to catch them in the act and publicize the videotape. I could have made their couple a hit on multiple websites. I could create an alibi for myself and beat up Zach. Hell, my 10th wedding anniversary was only a week away. I could organize the party that would end all parties. I could put it all on the big screen for our family and friends to see. Every idea appealed to me to one degree or another. I wanted them to be hurt, to feel shame. I wanted them to drown in regret for what they had done. I wanted them to pay, and pay dearly, for their betrayal. But I had a dilemma in front of me. I wanted to accomplish this without sinking to their level. When it was over, I wanted to be able to look at my reflection in the mirror and see that a good person was looking back at me. If I wanted to recover and move on with my life, I needed to know that, or I would turn into an empty shell of a person. If that happened, they would win, and I would lose. In a metaphorical sense, they would hold me as ransom for the rest of my life. I would never be able to trust or love again, and I wanted to love again. I wanted to have a family of my own. I wanted to be to my son or daughter what my father is to me, a hero. He was the man I aspired to be. If I had acted on the plans I had hatched so far, however satisfying and justified, I would not have been able to do that or become that. I would not have become a man of whom my father or my child would have been proud. And if I had carried out any of those plans, they would have known exactly how deeply they had hurt me. I could live with that knowledge if I truly believed that my pain would shame them and make them repent. But why would they care how they had hurt me? They had betrayed me for 12 years. They clearly didn't care about me or my feelings. If they had known the depth of my pain, they might even have gotten even more satisfaction. I couldn't give them that. Dejected, I headed for my room. I needed to be alone. I couldn't be around anyone, not even strangers. Despite my lack of appetite, I heeded my common sense and ordered an early dinner. And while I waited for it to be delivered, I took a shower. I ate without tasting. I looked without seeing and heard without hearing. Bitterness and frustration overwhelmed me, blinding me to my surroundings. I thrashed around the room, but it was too small to accommodate the emotions overwhelming me, so I headed for the long stretch of beach practically at my doorstep. And there was something satisfying about hearing the crunch of sand beneath my feet and the steady sound of waves crashing against the shore. I thrashed about on the beach, kicking sand, picking up and throwing bits of driftwood and shells into the sea. Outwardly, I was silent, but inwardly I was screaming. It wasn't fair. Why is life so unfair? So unfair? It seemed that the guilty parties would come out virtually unscathed, while I, the innocent party, would pay the price in every way, physically, mentally, financially, and emotionally. Injustice was like poison in my gut, its acid flowing through my veins, eating away at me. They were abusers, but unless inspiration visited me, the best revenge I could exact on them would be success and a good life. It didn't seem enough, not even close to enough. Next chapter. As I let myself back into the room, I realized I hadn't turned my phone on all day. As soon as it turned on, the new ringtone I'd set for Claire rang. Amon's I Don't Want You Back was a pleasantly different song from the old ringtone I had set for my unfaithful wife, John Legend's All of Me. Yes, the new song definitely matched my feelings and our situation better. I guess I'll agree with the experts. There's a song for every occasion. Acting quickly, I turned on the in-room radio, which I had pre-tuned so that it would not pick up stations, but would emit a loud, annoying crackle. As a backup, I grabbed the crumpled piece of paper I'd also prepared shortly after checking in, and then hit the speaker button on my cell phone. Danny, where are you? I can't get into the house. Claire? I started manipulating the paper next to the phone. Danny, what's that noise? I can barely hear you, and the static is terrible. What are you? I can hear breaking up, I replied, only saying every other word in the sentence. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Danny, can you hear me? I can barely make out what you're saying. You're breaking up. I can't get into the house. My key doesn't work. Where are you? When will you be home? What? I got the word, said. Receive. Charger home. Phone to death. I'll be home on Friday. You. As I reached for the phone that was on the bedside table, I heard Claire yell at me not to hang up. I smiled and pressed the end button. I knew Claire. She would be pissed. My dear wife was spoiled and not used to being kept waiting. I couldn't stop smiling as I imagined her disappointment. Was my act petty? Yes. Childish? Yes, again. Was it pleasing to me? I swear, yes. Still smiling, I checked my messages and texts. Sure enough, Claire had left a dozen or more. I happily read and listened to them all. A few times she even emailed me. They were all in the same vein as her call, and you could tell by the tone how her despair at not being able to reach me or get into the house was growing. Seeing and hearing her growing irritation, I smiled wider and wider. I gloated over her frustration and even whistled as I went outside. Sure, I could have called her from my room phone or booted up my laptop and replied to her email, and under normal circumstances I would have done so. But as I was pleased to discover, nothing improves the mood like pissing off a whore wife. Next chapter. My days were busy, and intentionally so. I was doing what I had promised to do to my father and brother. I was looking for opportunities in housing. I met with builders and architects and left business cards everywhere. This would save me time when it came time to put together an estimate for finishing or any other work I found as a result of my search. The nights were hard, and even my satisfaction with Claire's increasingly frustrating texts and emails was hollow. Despite all my resolutions, unanswered questions, resentment, and rage over being used and betrayed by Claire and Zach kept me going. The beach took the brunt of my frustration. I walked a few miles. Some of my anger was directed at myself. The hints were there, I realize that now. Hindsight is definitely 20/20ths. Zach, being Zach, couldn't resist dropping a few sentences. Why hadn't I noticed his tendency to brag before? I stopped and turned around, looking out to sea. The waves lapped at my ankles, and my feet sank lightly into the wet sand. The sensation was cool and welcome, unlike the memories I had shortly after my 5th wedding anniversary. I could clearly picture Zach's face as he teased me with snippets of information after I jokingly asked about his love life. She's really cool. No, I'm not ready to introduce her to everyone just yet. I want to keep her to myself for a while longer. Those were just a few of his first hints. And then came the most serious ones. She's married. The old man doesn't suit her, but she feels sorry for him, so she stays. My disapproving look must have spoken volumes, because he commented on it. He had the good sense to tell me not to judge until I'd walked a mile in his lady's shoes. And then he smirked and said that if any bird offered to do to me what this woman had done for him, I would abandon my marriage vows without a second thought. He even uttered a few perverse phrases, and I had to ask him to stop because I was afraid Claire would come in and hear him. Of course he was wrong. I would never cheat on Claire, no matter how perverted the woman who proposed to me was. But I didn't argue at that point. He stopped, but not before asking me to keep his news to myself. Said he didn't want Claire and the rest of the family to come down on him for having fun with a married woman. I remembered the look on his face, the look in his eyes. Amused and yet somehow gloating or triumphant. Gloating? Now, with the wisdom of hindsight, I understood his amusement better. He must have found my promise to keep the secret of his affair, the affair he was having with my wife, super funny. Next chapter. Another evening, another walk on the beach. I worried that I had a new habit that was an obscene counterbalance to Claire's habit. I was replaying my life with her, examining each memory through a whole new filter. In my mind, I studied everything. Her hair, her makeup, her clothes, even the way she walked. Were her clothes wrinkled? Was her hair disheveled? Was her lipstick fresh? Smudged? Unfamiliar perfume? Shampoo? I combed through each memory looking for evidence, which, strangely enough, I didn't want to find, as it would be further confirmation of her betrayal as well as my stupidity, my blind faith in my unfaithful wife. Trying to analyze something unanalyzable with unreliable memories was excruciating, soul-destroying. I was such a fool, a huge, dumb as a brick fool. My faith in myself was lower than a gnat's belly. I had never felt so insecure in every way, as a man, as a lover, as a friend. Not even as a teenager had I felt so insecure. And still, I dug into my memories. I was sick with self-loathing, and like an itch, I couldn't contain the urge to torture myself for answers, for clues I'd missed. Next chapter. I usually liked driving. Something about the way the scenery flashed outside my side windows, or maybe it was the way my Toyota absorbed the road ahead and spit it back out with satisfaction. Whatever the case, I've always enjoyed long-distance driving. But not today. Today it was torture. Every mile that brought me closer to home felt like part of a drawn-out walk to the gallows. Today, I was at war with myself. Again. One half of me wanted answers, wanted explanations, wanted the truth. The other half didn't want to listen to her lies, her delusional, self-serving excuses. Nothing she said could undo what she'd done. Neither words nor apologies could make an iota of difference in the outcome, so what was the point? Next chapter. I changed my mind at the last moment and swerved, changing lanes without indicating, which earned me a few honks and one-finger salutes, and then turned left, toward my parents' house. I stopped in front of the house and stared at their front door, mentally apologizing to them for the quagmire I was about to get them into. Technically, the problems were mine, but our family was a tight-knit one. Mom, Dad, and Sean, as well as Sean's wife Mel, wouldn't be able to detach themselves from my problems any more than the earth would stop revolving around the sun. Mom especially, I knew, would be devastated. After all, Jack's mother was her little sister. I looked at the passenger seat, at the folder I'd put Zach's love letters in, and snorted. A display folder, as if those life-destroying letters were some kind of school project or valuable office report. Personally, I'd rather piss on them, but common sense told me that, at least for now, they should be cherished. Wrinkling my nose in disgust, I picked them up, climbed out of the car, and with a determined gait that was more bluff than sincerity, headed down the walkway to the front door and knocked. Mom answered. She leaned forward, grabbed my bicep, and kissed my cheek at the same time she spoke. What's to say about multitasking? Honey, what's going on? Claire has been calling and coming to see us every day, saying she can't reach you and that she can't get into the house. We've been very worried. Why aren't you answering your phone or checking your email? How about you let me in, call Sean and Mel, give me one of Dad's beers, and we'll all sit down together, and I'll tell you what's going on. I'd rather explain everything once. I don't want to repeat myself. Oh, God, that sounds ominous. She stepped aside, looking worried. She knew me. She knew it had to be something extraordinary to make me act so out of character. I followed her down the hall and continued on my way when she stopped at a table in the lobby to call Sean and Mel. I helped myself to a beer and then headed out to the back patio where I knew I would find my dad. My mom always joked that they should live in a tent, since my dad didn't need a house. Unless it was raining, he always preferred to be outdoors. Apparently, after working as a bricklayer all his life, his preference for fresh air and sunlight was part of his DNA. As youngsters, Sean and I both wanted to follow my father into the profession, but he insisted that we find an occupation that didn't depend on the weather. I enjoyed designing and building and chose to become a carpenter specializing in interior construction. Sean was fascinated by lightning. He still regularly relaxes on his porch during thunderstorms, taking a mile of photos of lightning over the water, and everything electrical, and so he became an electrician. For many years, we all worked in the same house, at least until Dad retired a little over a year ago. Sean and I, of course, still recommended each other's services to our customers. My father stood sizing me up, extending his hand to greet me, and enclosing me in a strong, masculine embrace. Once untied, we sat down, and I placed the display folder on the low coffee table before taking a large sip of beer. My father continued to stare at me, raising an eyebrow in mute question. It's a long and difficult story to tell you all, Dad, so I want to wait until Sean and Mel get here to tell it just once. Dad reached out his hand, huge and rough from long hours of work, and patted my knee, just like when I was a kid. All right, Danny. I'm a patient man. I can wait. That was one of the reasons I loved and respected my dad. He knew when to push and when to hold off. Soon my mother joined us, making the kettle. That in itself told me that she knew I was about to confess a tragedy. Hot, sweet tea was her answer to all of life's hardships. She silently brought out the kettle and 2 cups, and then handed my father and I a fresh beer and set aside another for Sean's imminent arrival. And it inevitably came. No sooner had Mom emptied the tray than I heard a knock on the front door. Sean and Mel lived only a few streets away, but even so, they had to leave as soon as they hung up the phone. I hoped they had left the kids at home with Emily, who was their regular babysitter and conveniently lived in their neighborhood. The next thing I knew, I realized Mel was simultaneously hugging me and hitting me over the head with handcuffs. Another manifestation of female multitasking. Oh my God, where have you been? And why haven't you been answering calls and emails? We were really worried. We were going to call the police if we didn't hear from you today. Mel was crying while managing to look angry and relieved at the same time. I opened my mouth to reply, but Mel wasn't done yet. You scared the shit out of me. Out of all of us. How could you be so irresponsible? If something had happened to you, how would we have told Maddie and Declan? Your niece and nephew adore you. Can you imagine how devastated they'd be? Damn it, Danny, you can't do this. Nobody knew where you were staying. We only knew it was a few hours north. Do you have any idea how scared we were? You must have a good explanation. I'm sorry, Mom, but it's true. Mom just patted Mel's hand. She was used to her temper and speech. It was something we all loved about her, and it was why she was perfect for Sean, who was much calmer. Sit down, sweetie. Let's give Danny a chance to say something. Okay, first of all, I'm sorry for the inconvenience I caused. I guess I wasn't thinking as clearly as I thought I was. I wasn't thinking about the big picture, I guess. But I think I was in shock, and I needed to leave. Mel looked like she was about to lash out at me again, so I held up my hand. Please hear me out before you tear me apart, Mel. When you do, I think you'll understand why I rushed off in a semi-fainting state. And I told them everything. I left nothing out, not even the things that made me look bad, like my desire to give Claire a few headaches and anxious minutes when she discovered her key didn't work. So, if Claire is calling you every day, can I assume she hasn't gained access to the house? No. She'd either call or come by after work to see if she'd heard from you. We all refrained from doing anything until today because you said you'd be home today, Mom explained. I laughed. I have to say, that surprises me a little. The lock change worked out better than I expected. I thought there was a good chance she'd talk some gullible locksmith into letting her in. I figured that at best it would keep her out. At worst it would slow her down. And either way she'd get gray hairs from realizing what was going on and how much I knew. She tried to talk one of them into letting her in, but he demanded she show something other than her driver's license to prove she lived here and wanted her to sign all these forms. She said she couldn't show him the bill or anything else because you handle all those matters. She was very upset. I couldn't hold back a smile of satisfaction. So far, so good for my possession. I wouldn't smile just yet, Danny. One visit to the court and she'll probably be allowed to come back. Despite his words, Sean was smiling too. Yeah, I know, but it'll give me time to convince her that it would be in her best interest to move out on her own. And how are you going to do that, son? Dad asked. Very simply. I'll tell her that if she comes back to live with us, I'll move out too, because there's no way I can live under the same roof with her. And if I leave, not only will the renovations stop, because I definitely won't be doing them, but I won't be paying for another tradesman's services. Besides, I'll stop paying my mortgage. It'll have to be paid off. Oh, Danny, are you sure that's a good idea? You could lose the house. Mom took my hand and squeezed it gently. I know it's a gamble, Mom, but I'd rather lose the house than see it go to her when it was built with my blood, sweat, and tears. But the deposit and all the money you put into it. It's only money, Mom. I'm young, I can always make more money, and I'll be screwed from 6 ways to Sunday before I see her profit from her lies and betrayal. She's a whore and screwed me for real, but she won't get a dime more from me than is necessary. It spoke volumes about my mother's mood that she didn't chide me for my language. She wasn't usually as tolerant of Sean's or me cursing as Mel was. That was fine. Very proper. I'm with you, Danny, Mel chimed in. Cheaters shouldn't prosper. And anyway, that bitch should pay for what she did, and so should Rathzak. So where is she staying? Mom opened her mouth to answer, and then closed it, frowning before trying again. Actually, Danny, I don't know. She never told me after she turned down my offer to keep her here. I'm sorry, honey, but... It's okay, Mom. You weren't supposed to know. I wanted so badly so you wouldn't have to lie for me. I actually made up a few different stories. I wanted to confuse her so she wouldn't know where to find me. I told her work friends that I'd be working out west and organizing a surprise party, and I kind of mixed both stories for Zach and... You called Zach? You could hear the shock in Mel's voice. Yeah. How did you not jump the phone line and gut the bastard? Sean asked. I grinned. With great difficulty. You bet, my father muttered, shaking his head, a grim smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The conversation died down, and there was silence at the table. All eyes were on me. I could feel their love and support without saying a word. The first to break the silence was my father. It looks like your doubts about Claire were justified after all, dear. I turned to my mother in surprise. She had never been cold or unkind to Claire. There may not have been the closeness she shared with Mel, but she had never been unfriendly, criticizing, or showing favoritism when it came to gifts. Did you have reservations? Mom shrugged. Nothing that I could point out. She was always polite, sweet, and well spoken. But yes, I always had my doubts about her. At first, I attributed it to her youth, but now she's in her 30s and should have outgrown any flightiness. I don't know what to say except that it was a woman's intuition, I guess. I never said anything to you because you were head over heels in love, and I had nothing to base my doubts on. Did either of you see anything out of the ordinary? I racked my brain, but I never noticed her flirting with him more than anyone else, or him hitting on her at our family gatherings. Everyone shook their heads. They've obviously been very careful about their flings, Mel remarked, stating the obvious. What is it? My mom asked quietly, placing her fingertips on the folder with the image. These are all the letters Zach wrote. The folder ended up in her hands and was half open before I could warn her. Mom, I don't think you want to see them. They're rather crude and explicit. They're not love letters at all. She paused, looking at me over the edge of the folder. I have no doubt I'm going to freak out now, but I can handle it. We all watched her in silence. Several times she closed her eyes for a long moment, but other than a sigh or two that escaped her compressed lips, she didn't make a sound. When she finished, her face contorted into a mask of disgust. She handed the folder to my father, who followed suit, and began reading its vile contents. Reaching across the table, my mom took both of my hands. I'm so sorry you had to read this, dear, about two people you loved and trusted. I wouldn't blame you if you strangled that bitch to death and then went and did the same thing to Zach. I'm glad you didn't because I don't want you in jail, but a slow and painful death is what they deserve. Again, there was silence. The lack of conversation was awkward. We were usually a noisy bunch, but I knew them all well enough to realize that no one wanted to talk much until they'd all read the letters. Mom and Mel sipped tea, while Sean, Dad, and I sipped beer. When Dad finished, he handed the folder to Sean and stood up. Give me a hand, Danny. I followed Dad into the kitchen where he hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. I sank into the embrace, snuggling up to him like I had as a child, when my father's arms were the safest place on earth. When we finally pulled away from each other, he cupped my face and looked fiercely into my eyes. It's not your fault, Danny. You've never treated that bitch with anything other than love and devotion. The minute you start doubting yourself, call me or your mom. Don't let it break you, son. She's clearly not worth it. I nodded, afraid to speak in case I snapped and cried like a baby. Sensing my dilemma, my father continued to hug my face and look into my eyes, trying, I think, to give me strength. You're going to get through this, Danny. I promise you this. You have a family that loves you and will support you no matter what. I know, Dad. Good, but it doesn't hurt to be reminded sometimes that you're not alone. He released his grip on my cheeks and pulled me to him for another hug. Patting me on the back, he pulled away and picked up the kettle, filling it with fresh water and turning it on. He walked over to the fridge and pulled out 3 sodas, which he handed to me. We need clear heads. Once we have a plan of action, we can have a few beers or brandy, he said by way of explanation. We went back to the others, and I saw that Sean and Mel, who had been sharing a folder, no doubt to save time, were almost finished. Sean was silent, his jaw clenched in a way that I realized indicated the depth of his rage. He never made a noise about his rage. I had only seen him lose his temper a few times in my entire life, but each time his silence and immobility preceded the explosion of rage. The cliché, the calm before the storm, suited him just fine. Mel, on the other hand, was muttering to herself, her cheeks flushed with what I guessed was a mixture of horror and anger. Glancing at Sean to make sure he was finished too, Mel threw the folder back on the table in disgust. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would never have believed they were capable of such an abomination. Lowering himself back into his seat, Dad looked at Mom. I put the kettle on for you and Mel, dear. It should have boiled by now. I'll do it, Mom. I had to do something or I think I might explode. Mel grabbed the kettle, nearly knocking the lid off in her haste. Can I assume you're going to divorce her? Sean asked. Yes. The way I see it, divorce is my only option. Everyone nodded. Mel returned and began refilling my mother's cup. Divorce is good, of course, but you have to make them pay for what they did. I can't lie, Mel. I've imagined many truly impressive ways to get back at them, but I stopped talking, sighing. But I don't want to stoop to their level. I'm afraid that if I do, I won't be able to get back out of this muck. I don't want to lose myself. You don't have to, my mom said. Really, their own words and actions will damn them both. She had all of our attention. We'll make a public announcement in all the local papers, which will serve as an official acknowledgement of your separation. You've done nothing wrong, so we don't need to sugarcoat the situation. We can clearly state that the reason for the breakup was Claire's infidelity with a member of your extended family. You can even name Zach if you'd like. We then send what we say is a polite email, call, or letter to all our family and friends, including Claire's family, where we give all the details, naming names and timelines, and let them know that we have concrete evidence that we are happy to share. We make copies of the letters and scan them, and then let people who have a natural curiosity or love of gossip do the work for us. Anyone who asks, and believe me, they will ask, we will share the letters, every one of them. Like I said, Danny, you've done nothing wrong. You haven't done anything you should be ashamed of. Anyone who knows anything about you knows that you've always treated Claire like a queen. I considered Mom's plan. It was simple, honest, effective, and I would keep my integrity. What about Aunt Sally? Sean asked. We'll have to accept that she won't leave Zach. She is his mother, after all. But if she stays with him, she can join him in exile because I won't tolerate anyone treating my boys the way Zach and Claire treated Danny. Her voice was determined, but I could see the sadness in her eyes. It hurt her to lose her sister. Maybe we can, I don't know, find a way to use the letters to really humiliate and embarrass them? Maybe make posters and put them up all over town. Post videos all over the internet? I just feel like we need to do more. It warmed me to see how devoted Mel was to me, to our whole family. She was fierce in her devotion. Sean had certainly won when he married her. I couldn't imagine her betraying or using Sean the way Claire had used me. I looked at my family and felt blessed. Without a single request from me, my battle had become their battle. That was something Claire could never take away from me. We could, sweetheart, but I want you to think about it for a minute. Forget for a moment about the legal ramifications if we did something like this. If you had the choice of having the man you wanted hate you or be totally indifferent to you, which would you prefer? Mel pondered her mother's question. I hate to admit it, but I'd rather he hated me, because that would mean I'd at least affect him in some way. And hate can turn into love. If he was indifferent, it would mean I didn't exist in his eyes. I wouldn't want to feel worthless, like I've been judged and dismissed as unimportant. Exactly. In my opinion, the opposite of love is not hate, but indifference. Claire will be much more hurt if Danny pretends he doesn't care one bit than if he snaps and hurls insults. She's a vain girl. She won't like it that she doesn't matter. You're assuming, Mom, that she cares what I think and feel, and given the kind of woman who has presented herself in these letters, that may not be entirely true. Oh, she cares, Danny. She wants you. Maybe not for the reasons you wanted her to want you, but she wants you. Otherwise, she wouldn't have stuck around for 12 years, and she wouldn't have been so adamant about hiding her true nature. Whatever her motives, she wouldn't want you to pull a fast one. Yeah, she wanted a gullible chump to pay for her lifestyle, I muttered, unable to hide the bitterness I felt. The answers came pouring out fast and thick, each one interrupting the other. You're not gullible, you trust. There's a difference. You're not a chump. Don't let her make you think that. Don't give her that kind of power. You're not the dummy. It's her. She had a wonderful man who would do anything for her, and she left him. Thanks, guys, but I can't help but feel stupid and used. She deceived me for 12 years. I never suspected a thing. If I hadn't stumbled across those letters, I'd still be happily falling all over myself to make her happy. Well, then we're all fools, my mother declared. Because reservations aside, none of us ever suspected any such thing. Son, you're not a fool, and neither are we, my father said. His voice was firm, intolerant of objection. When you fall in love and get married, you trust that person. That's how marriage works. And you keep trusting until he does something that breaks that trust. Claire clearly succeeded in deception, and you weren't supposed to know it until she made a mistake. It will be a sad day for humanity if we go into every relationship with suspicion and expectation of the worst. Okay, so what you're saying is that I should hide how hurt and angry I am and make Claire think I don't care. Mom nodded. Yes. Let her try to explain herself. Information is king, after all. She might even back herself into a corner with her lies. Give her enough rope to hang herself. I'd even go so far as to tape your conversations with her. Your phone can do that sort of thing, right? She paused, seeing the look on my face. Honey, I know this is going to be hard to listen to. Maybe don't. Maybe try to disconnect while she's talking. That's actually a good idea. It'll help you stay unemotional. Every time she pauses, just shrug or say something like, never mind, or you're already done. I need to do this and that. Look at your watch. Try to look bored. Talk as little as possible. Don't give in to any of her taunts, entreaties, or manipulations. She's bound to try all that at some point. But if I do that, I'll never be able to say any of the things I want to say to her. I don't want to live my whole life with that shit festering inside me. Dad put his arm around my knee. It's not forever, Danny. Think of it like a war or a chess game. It's a strategy for an early offensive. She's the enemy, son. You don't want her to see your vulnerability. Later, when the dust settles from your divorce, you can tell her whatever the hell you need or want. Maybe it will be better then. You'll have listened to all her bullshit excuses and arguments, and you'll have your answers ready. You'll be able to rehearse and fine-tune in your mind what you want to say and say it calmly. Do it that way, and you can turn your words into a weapon to smash her with. And do it now, and you'll probably say or do something you'll regret later. I nodded. He was right. If I opened my mouth now, I wouldn't be able to stop the flood of accusations I wanted to direct at her. I wouldn't be able to hide my hurt or my rage. I'd drown her in them, and then she'd know how to push my buttons. We talked some more, and Mom and Mel even got me to practice making an indifferent and bored look while they gave cliched excuses for adultery. It didn't mean anything. It was just sex. I was bored, lonely. And most poignantly, I love you and only you. He means nothing to me. By the time they were done with me, I was sure I could play my part, just so long as the confrontation didn't drag on. Next chapter. Ready or not, I was relieved to see that Claire wasn't waiting for me when I got home. I knew she wouldn't be far away, since her workday usually ended just after 5, and now it was 5:15. I unloaded my gear, cursing the way my gut knotted at the thought of the upcoming confrontation with Claire. No amount of deep breaths could loosen its stranglehold. I poured myself a finger of brandy and stared into its amber depths for a long moment before taking a sip. Closing my eyes, I swirled the drink around in my mouth, coating my tongue and gums with it, then let it trickle down my throat, drop by drop. The burning was pleasant, soothing, just what I needed. At 5:40, there was a knock on the door. A few deep breaths, then a quick inspection of myself in the mirror to make sure my expression was neutral, and I was almost ready. I grabbed my phone, switched it to record mode, and slipped it, along with my vault keys, into my pocket. I was ready now. Walking down the hallway was slow. I felt like I was walking through thick mud. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, causing Claire to take a step back. The door closed behind me with a quiet bang. Her familiar scent spread around me, hitting me with a force like a punch to the gut. I immediately switched to breathing through my mouth. Danny? What the hell? Where have you been, and why haven't you answered any of my calls or emails? And did you change the locks? As she spoke, clearly angry and frustrated, it dawned on me that she didn't know I had discovered the love letters. She hadn't suspected that I knew about her long-standing affair. In that instant, I decided to leave her in the dark. Let the bitch read about it in the papers like everyone else. Then she'd have her 15 minutes of fame like the celebrities she idolized. Hey, Claire. Yes, I changed the locks. With our 10th anniversary looming on the horizon, I did a little digging on myself and came to the conclusion that I was done pretending to love you just so I could get my ass kicked on a regular basis. Truth be told, it's become boring and too much hard work, so I've decided I'm going to divorce you. What? The shocked look on Claire's face was priceless. It took everything I had not to smile with fierce glee at her bewilderment. You heard me. I don't love you. I don't need you, so I'm kicking you out. You, you, you can't do that. I don't believe you. I love you. You love me. I, I don't understand. This is my home too. Her incoherent phrasing spoke to her confusion, and the part of me that hated her and what she was doing reveled in it. I just finished telling you I don't love you. I was faking it, and I can kick you to the curb. I just did. Here are the keys to the storage unit where I put all your stuff. If I missed anything, email me and I'll pack it up and leave it out front for you. She accepted the keys, looking at them as if she'd never seen keys before in her life. But this is my house too. You can't kick me out. I have just as much right to live here as you do. Right. But if you move in, I'll move out. And then who's going to finish the repairs? And I'm certainly not paying the mortgage on an apartment I don't live in, so if you really want to live here in an unfinished house, be my guest, but you'll be the one to pay the bank loan and all the work. I'm not giving a dime. Tears ran down Claire's cheeks. My heart clenched, and I fought the 12-year-old upbringing that urged me to reach out and comfort her. I glanced at my watch, trying to look nonchalant. I don't understand, Danny. What's going on? When I left for the spa, you told me you loved me, kissed me goodbye. And now you want a divorce? Her voice shook. She reached for my hand. I pulled away. Yes, I want a divorce. Why? What happened that led to this? Did you meet someone? Are you having an affair? It took every ounce of self-control I had to breathe normally and keep a neutral expression on my face. My arms literally itched with the urge to wrap my arms around her neck and squeeze until there wasn't a drop of air left in my lungs. I wanted to look into her eyes when the life left her. She had killed a part of me, so it was only fair that a part of her died as well. No, there's no affair. I'm just bored with you, and I'm ready for a change. Why, Danny? Why are you acting like this? I don't understand how you can change so suddenly. How you can be so cruel. It's not like you. I had reached the limit of my acting ability. I had to get this over with soon, or I was either going to kill the bitch or spew all the nasty words at her. Look, I'm going out tonight. I want to shower and change, so can we talk about this some other time? She stood there with her mouth open, tears streaming down her cheeks. In my opinion, she didn't understand what was going on. I let myself walk back into the house, leaving her standing on the porch in tears. Once inside, I leaned against the wall for support. God, this pretense was exhausting. How had she dealt with it for 12 years? Next chapter. I leaned back in my chair, rereading what I'd written. Thank God for laptops and word processing programs. If I'd used good old-fashioned pen and paper, I'm sure I would have used up a whole stack of paper while I wrote and rewrote the divorce notice. Technically, I didn't need to post the notice to register my separation from Claire, but for many reasons it served my purpose. I, Daniel Jonathan McCormack, born January 12, 1982, do hereby declare that effective March 21st, 2017, I have separated from my wife, Claire Elizabeth McCormack, née Johnson, born November 11, 1985, because I discovered that she had betrayed our wedding vows. namely, the one in which she promised to leave everyone else. Due to her long-standing relationship with a member of my extended family, I will no longer be responsible for the debts of Claire Elizabeth McCormack as of the aforementioned date. I cast a glance at the corner of the screen. It was already a little after 9, and I'd had enough. The notice wasn't that long, less than 100 words. I should have written it in minutes, not hours. I couldn't decide how much to say and whether or not to put Zach's name in it. I had revised and changed the text so many times that I couldn't think straight anymore. I closed the program, deciding I would look at it in the morning with fresh eyes. Placing the laptop on the table next to me, I began to contemplate whether I should put on a movie or go to bed and try to sleep. I hadn't made my decision yet when I heard a knock on the door. Thinking it was Claire coming back for round 2, I rested my chin against my chest and said a silent prayer for peace and strength. On my way to the front door, I stopped in front of the hallway mirror to check if my flawless face was in place and put my phone in record mode. I opened the door. "Listen, Claire. Dad? Sean?" They smiled at me. "Nice bored face, son?" We all laughed. It felt good. I stepped aside and they, knowingly, as if they'd been to my house many times, walked into the kitchen themselves and helped themselves to a beer. "I see you weren't kidding about doing a little remodeling," Sean remarked, getting comfortable on one end of the couch. I snorted. "I'm a man of my word. So was it your mom who sent you to check up on me?" "No, it was my idea. But Sean and I aren't here to babysit you. We're here to help you plan a little fun for Ratzak. We thought you needed a little more payback than a red face for that nasty bastard. Although, if your mom asks, we just played cards and got you drunk." "Daddy, you sly dog." "A little white lie to protect her feelings won't hurt her." He winked at me. "And it'll do her husband good if he wants to get a little naughty." Sean and I chuckled. "Your mom is a good, gentle woman, and I love her dearly. But like most women, she doesn't understand how a man's mind works." My father shrugged and grinned. "Sometimes a man has to do what a man has to do." End of part 1. Part the second of may be coming out in 12 hours. Write in the comments if you're waiting for it. Also give a like under this video and subscribe to my channel. I hope you enjoyed this video.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. but carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.